Hi, welcome back. In this video, we're going to learn about a CSS property called box shadow, which allows us to add shadows to certain elements. Okay. Suppose in HTML we got a div with class block, and for this block in CSS we set the width and height and also a yellow background. This is our block on the screen. And now let's add a shadow to it. So if we add a box shadow with the following values, then we'll end up with this gray shadow box. So what exactly did we write here? Well, the box shadow property has several values and a few ways you can write them. The simplest way is when you specify 3 values. The first value is the offset on the x-axis. As you see here, in our case we shifted the shadow to the right by 10 pixels. And the second value is the offset y, and it's by how much you shift the shadow vertically. Okay, so we wrote minus 10 pixels, which means our shadow will shift 10 pixels upwards. And the third one is the color of the shadow, so we wrote gray, and that's why we have gray. Alright, so another way of setting the box shadow values is if you have 4 values. For example, if we write something like this, we will end up with the shadow that you see on the screen right now. So how is this different from the previous one? Well, the difference is that the third value, instead of the color, we have 5 pixels. So the first 2 values are the same, the offset on the x and y axis. That's why the shadow didn't move anywhere from the previous time, because those are the same. But now as the third value, we have blur radius, which is 5 pixels, and this specifies by how much the shadow is going to be blurred. Of course, the higher the value, the blurrier it's going to get. And finally, the last value is the color of the shadow, which is still gray. Alright, so now on to the third option of writing down the box shadow. It's when we have 5 values. So with these values, we will have something that looks like this. How is this different from the last time? Well, as you see, the first 3 values are the same. We got the offset x, the offset y, and we got the blur radius. But now we got a fourth parameter that used to be where the color was, and now it's 6 pixels. This is the spread radius. Spread radius specifies by how much our shadow is going to be spread out. As you see here, our shadow has spread out further in all 4 directions. So in a way, you can say it got larger. Alright, and then the last parameter is the color, of course. Okay, there is one more way of writing down the values here. And this is for when you want to create an inner shadow. That is, the shadow that doesn't go on the outside, but it's on the inside. So in order to achieve this, we need to write box shadow and then what you see on the right. So how is this different from the previous ones? The difference is that we have this inset parameter. Inset specifies the type of the shadow. So inset means that it's an inner shadow. Basically, there are 2 types of shadows. The first one is the default type, which is the outer shadow. We don't have to specify anything for that. Inset is the other type, which you have to specifically specify if you want to get it. And then after this, it's all the same. So you got the 2 offsets, the blur radius, the spread radius, and the color. And as you see, our shadow is somewhat blurred, and it spreads inward by 6 pixels. Okay, so that should all make sense now. Let's quickly recap everything we covered so far. So first we look at the most basic type of shadow, where we only have 3 values. We got a horizontal offset, a vertical offset, and we got the color. Then we added another value on the third position, and this is what makes the shadow blurry. It's called blur radius. And then we added another value in addition to that, which was the spread radius. This is by how much the shadow spreads out. And the last one that we looked at was one more additional value that goes at the beginning, and it's called inset. And basically, it means that the shadow is going to be on the inside. Okay, good. Now let's look at how this all works with some real examples. In HTML, we create a div with class block. Then in CSS for block, we're going to add 200 pixels for the width, height, let's say also 200, and the background is going to be yellow. And to get it out of the corner, so it's not stuck there by the edge, let's add a margin. About 100 on top, and then 0 on the right and on the bottom. And then about 300 from the left. Let's see. And there it is. Here's our block. Great. Next, let's add a shadow. For that, we write box shadow. And first we're going to do the most basic version. So 10 pixels, this is the X offset. Then minus 10 pixels, which is the Y offset. And the color, gray. Let's see what we've got. Here we have our shadow just like we expected. And if instead of 10 we put 30 pixels here, and this is minus 30, then as you see, it shifts out even further. And say instead of minus we just have 30, then it's going to shift down. There. And what do we do if we want the shadow to be right next to the block as if it was a separate block? Well, it makes sense that if the width is 200 pixels, then we can shift it by 200 pixels. And as you see, our shadow begins right where our block ends, even though it doesn't look like a shadow anymore. So let's just go back to what we had before. Okay, let's add a third value, which is going to be our blur. For example, about 10 pixels. And let's see what this does. As you see right now, the shadow is solid, just like another block. And now it's blurred. Please note, the higher this value, the more blur you're going to get. So that makes sense, right? Okay, and another parameter is the spread radius, by how much we spread the shadow out. For example, if we add 10 pixels here, then it's going to increase by 10 pixels. See that? And if 30 pixels, it's going to increase even more. So right now it got to the edge of the block. Basically, it offset the 30 pixel vertical offset we specified before. And here it went even further out. Okay, so that makes sense too. And the last option is when we did the inner shadow. As the first value, we write inset. And then these two offsets are going to be 0. And the remaining values we can leave the same. Let's see. As you see, now the shadow goes inward. If we decrease the radius spread to say 10 pixels, then now the shadow is accordingly less. This way, using this inset shadow, we can even create an effect of a 3D object. Alright, in addition to that, we can also add multiple shadows to the same block. For that, you just add a comma and then you write the values for another shadow. And that's it. Let's make this one an outside shadow, for example. Say both offsets are going to be 0. The blur can be something like 20 pixels. And the spread also 20 pixels. Color can be gray. And let's see what we've got. And now it's as if the outline of our block disappeared. Let's change the color to red. And we see the outline of the block, the inward shadow, and the outward one. So this way you can add as many shadows as you want and combine them to achieve various effects. Okay, that's it for now. I'll see you in the next video.